most people know, and it's certainly the fleet crew knows, which deputy or officer is going to end up in an accident.
There are things that are inherent with our role as a leader, and so many times we just don't take that step and intervene when we should.
Sometimes leadership is finding the courage, mustering the courage to do the hard things and to step in early and have a conversation that helps somebody.
One of the largest inhibitors in a law enforcement organization, especially from a leadership perspective, is this is the way we've always done it. And culture is not easy to change. You're listening to the Elevate Your Call to Service podcast.
Here, law enforcement leaders gain practical tools to lead proactively in a reactive profession so they can communicate clearly, strengthen internal trust, and stay grounded in their call to serve.
I'm Mike McIntosh, a retired sheriff and current division chief with nearly 4 decades in law enforcement leadership.
And I'm Cathy McIntosh, a business and branding strategist and longtime law enforcement wife. I focus on the human side of leadership, communication, identity, and the internal dynamics that impact performance and trust across an organization.
Together, we combine real-world command experience with clear, actionable leadership conversations.
So you can lead with intention, build stronger teams, and elevate your call to service. Welcome back to the Elevate Your Call to Service. We've had a really fun couple of weeks. We were able to go to Disney World with part of our family. It always makes us really sad that our whole family couldn't be there, but we did enjoy some great grandkid time and just a lot of belly laughs and fun. And then from there, you flew directly from Orlando to Reno to attend a Western State Sheriff's Conference.
Yeah.
And tell me about that.
I've been a part of Western States for several years, and it's just, it's always an opportunity to go and be with, obviously, as the name implies, the sheriffs that make up sheriff's offices from the Mississippi and West, and just to kind of talk about the unique things that revolve around the Western States sheriffs. And this was an opportunity and really just a time for me to kind of just stay in tune with some of the issues that are going on within sheriff's offices. And it also reaffirms a lot of leadership principles that we already know. And there's always keynote speakers that participate in that. And as soon as I got back, I jumped in the car. You had picked me up at the airport, and I just kind of started talking about all of the things that, from a leadership perspective that was talked about or was gleaned in a training course.
I know that one of the things that we talked about right off the bat was the fact that in many organizations, you can literally see the trouble brewing. And it's really up to the leaders to step into those kinds of situations and do something about it before a small problem becomes a big problem. And you gave the example of most people know, and it's certainly the fleet crew knows, which deputy or officer is going to end up in an accident and is going to wreck their car. Or a lot of people know well in advance which officer has the potential of getting a complaint against them for being too vocal or, whatever.
Right.
The people that are closest to one another can see that trouble brewing before it actually bubbles up to the surface. And so there's this, we're going to call it a leadership intervention gap, which is what we're going to talk about today. And the fact that everybody knows it, nobody chooses to do anything about it most times.
Yeah.
And what leaders can do to pivot from that mindset into something that's more proactive and more intentional.
Yeah, and it's really interesting. Gordon Graham, he gave us about an hour and a half, almost 2 hours, in a keynote, and that was one of the points that he had really discussed during his keynote. And it's just something that has been in the forefront of my mind as an ABLE instructor, as a HEROES instructor, which is all about law enforcement intervention or intervention in corrections. there's that piece that, you know, the more that I've thought about it, is there's that leadership and intervention that we truly need. There are things that are inherent with our role as a leader, and so many times, for a variety of different reasons, we just don't take that step and intervene when we should.
You and I talked through a lot of examples of that, and some of them dating back to very first
Yeah.
days and years that you were a sergeant. But my question for you now is, why is it so hard? You would think there's some switch that flips. When you become a leader, everything becomes easy and you know exactly what to do and when to do it. And everybody just is on the same page and everybody agrees with one another. And obviously that couldn't be farther from the truth. But why is it that there's this hesitation to step into a situation when you can see trouble brewing before it comes? You can see this guy's driving on the edge.
Right.
He's driving a little
Right.
recklessly. He needs to tone it down. Why is it that nobody's speaking into that?
Yeah. It's really, there's a lot of pieces that I think attribute to that become what we call inhibitors, right? It inhibits us from doing or from intervening in something that we need to intervene in. And I would tell you that I think one of the largest inhibitors in a law enforcement organization, especially from a leadership perspective, is that old adage, this is the way we've always done it.
Mhm.
And so if nobody else is it thinks what's going on is wrong, or they're not addressing it, then maybe I would be wrong to do that. And it's unfortunate that we get into that mindset that really starts to build a culture within an organization. And now you multiply that by years, and every leader that goes through that organization that grows up as a sergeant and, you know, becomes one of the executive command staff, that's what's been modeled to them through their entire career. Why would they do something different? Because everybody before them, it didn't seem like it was an issue or it was a problem. And so, you know, I was thinking about that first sergeant job that I had. And I got promoted. And a lot of times in the sheriff's office, you go from wherever you were at, you go back to the jail division when you first get promoted. And that was in the case when I got promoted to sergeant. And part of the responsibilities of the jail was the courthouse. And I ended up being a sergeant over at the courthouse. And got over there and I was working around some deputies that I had actually worked with on the street that were now in the court security unit. And one in particular had been there a long time. He had been in the organization longer than I had. I really, as a sergeant, started to pick up on just the way that he would make jokes. And a lot of those jokes would be kind of racial in nature. Or he would use slang terms for different ethnic nationalities. And I started hearing this, and it obviously was the culture within this team of 10 or 11 deputies.
And you're the new guy. You're the sergeant, but you're the one who's new to the team.
Right. I hadn't been a part of this ever. I've been a part of this team. I'd worked with some of the members that were on the team. And I started noticing that these comments are made and nobody's saying anything. Well, as the leader of the team, I pulled this deputy aside and I said, "Hey, we can't talk like that." And he was really kind of offended that I was having this conversation with him because we, you know, "Hey, Mac, we go way back. Come on, you know I'm just joking. I don't mean any of it. I don't." And, you know, the old comment, "Nobody else has a problem with it, so I don't know why you do." And I had to stick to my guns. And I'm, you know, really glad that I did because, you know, when you intervene early, and have that conversation early, it allows us an opportunity to prevent any further harm,
Mm.
right? Or more harm. So the earlier that you can intervene, the better it's going to be, and the less harm will be created because you took a stand and you said, no, we're not going to do that anymore. And unfortunately, it continued a little bit. And I had to pull him back in, and I had to document and say, this is going in your personnel file. And again, he was not happy with me. And he was, kind of the age and the mindset that, we're supposed to be sticking together. There's this brotherhood in law enforcement, and you certainly don't, it's kind of the us versus them. You don't go against the deputies, just especially as a sergeant. You got to stand up for your deputies, right? And I just was, I knew that if I allowed that to continue and somebody had reported that it was a problem, that they were going to be looking at me because I didn't do my job. So that was kind of my first, real interaction in a leadership role, to take that step and say, now, I know that you've always done this, and this is just, Bill or Bob or Sally. That's just who they are. That's it. They don't mean anything by it, but it didn't make it right. And so, it's kind of as a leader, we have to take the stand and say, well, it's not going to happen on our team.
Sure.
That's not who we are.
Sure. And there's a risk. There's a risk of damaging a relationship. You'd known this guy a long time and probably didn't sit well, and your relationship probably was never the same after that. There's also a risk of being judged, like, oh, you're a high and mighty sergeant now, and you're coming in and you have something to prove, and it didn't bother you 2 weeks ago, and what's going on here? So how is it that a leader, especially a new leader or even a seasoned leader, can balance that accountability with maintaining trust and not even just trust with the individual, but trust with the entire team?
Yeah. And I think, quite honestly, when the team realized that had been done and that there was a change, for the most part, the team was on board with that, right? Because even though they may not have said anything,
They were feeling it.
I can't imagine that they appreciated some of the comments that he would make. And his comment back to me was, well, they don't mind. In fact, they even laugh. And I had to tell them, whether they do or they don't, it's wrong, and we're not going to do it anymore. But I will tell you that I was able to start to build that trust and that rapport with that team, because they knew that I was a man of my words. And if we said that we were going to do something or not do something, and that I was going to treat everybody fairly, right? We weren't going to allow, us to be saying things about other people based upon their ethnicity or their gender, or, whatever.
Or whatever. Is this just a risk management issue that we're talking about here?
No.
What else is?
I mean, this is truly, as you move on in your career, it starts to be the catalyst that changes the culture for the good, right? And I think that's the most important piece. When you first asked the question, how did we get here? Well, it was deep entrenched in the culture, and culture is not easy to change. It takes risk, it takes courage, it takes commitment, and as I started to work through that, it also gives kind of that, okay, McIntosh is doing that, I can do that too. If somebody was kind of on the sidelines and they were being passive and, really wanted to make that change, but they weren't real sure how this was going to come off, or if administration was going to support it, if their bosses were going to support it. When that first person takes that step and starts to move towards that direction, then that second person's going to take the step, and then the third, and pretty soon you start to create a different culture. And I would say that we want to do that where we're at. I heard somebody recently say, lead where your 2 feet are planted. Always be leading in that environment,
Mm-hmm.
and let the other things take shape the way that they do, but lead right here, right now. And to wait for, your the lieutenants to take care of it, or the chief to take care of it. No, you take care of it at the sergeant level, or you take care of it where you're at, where your 2 feet are at. If you're a commander, if you're a chief, take care of it. Make sure that it happens, so that you can start to change that culture, because it affects not just the organization, not just the leadership, but it obviously affects the person who is creating the harm. But more importantly, it's really affecting those that would be considered victim, or that the harm is
Inflicted upon.
inflicted upon.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Let me ask you something. When your teens talk about your leadership, what do you hope they say? Trust isn't automatic. Respect isn't inherited with rank. Both are built intentionally. Many sergeants and lieutenants are carrying more responsibility than they were ever formally prepared for. And many are wondering whether they're truly ready for the next step. Coaching creates space to slow down, reflect, and lead on purpose. We've seen leaders restore unity in divided teams. We've seen aspiring leaders step into promotions with steady confidence. If that's the kind of intentional growth that matters to you, go to leleaders.com and schedule a conversation. We'll meet you where you are, and we'll build a plan that fits your role and your goals.
And the way that your communication, and obviously we're looking at this from a few decades in the future, but if you look back at the way you communicated this new directive to this employee, you were clear, you were to the point, and you were firm about it. You weren't beating around the bush. You weren't, saying, well, I've had a lot of complaints, or no, it was, I've seen an issue.
Yeah.
This stops here. How does that clear communication strengthen what you're trying to do in an intervention role?
It makes it, or gives it the ability to kind of be that foundation that it needs to be. That this clear communication, you're setting it out, you're giving an opportunity for, conversation back, and there was definitely some conversation back, but just made sure that there was a clear understanding. But it was also communication that wasn't, he was a really good deputy. A great worker, right? And a valuable asset to that team, providing that he could turn it around, right? Or that he could no longer engage in that kind of activity. Anytime that I've intervened with or had those tough conversations, it's having that additional conversation of, this is an opportunity to really kind of grow through something like this, because you really show what kind of character you really have when you're going through the difficult things. Character when things are going really good, you can see it, but you really know, the true character of somebody when they're being challenged, or when they're going through a difficult trial.
And what's the long-term impact of stepping in early before something explodes and becomes a much bigger problem? What's the long-term benefit of that type of intervention?
I mean, if you were just to play that one scenario out, right? And you start to think about, had that continued and somebody did complain, I mean, you can extrapolate this out to where, there's a lawsuit against the organization for racial discrimination within the organization. There's a lawsuit for a lack of supervision or failure on supervision. There's the term hostile work environment. So when you start to think of the impact that can have if you don't step in, it can be pretty serious. Not to mention the fact that leaders can actually lose their jobs because it's going to come back on them. And I think that that's one of the things that becomes really important is when you're in a leadership role, it starts and stops with you, right? I mean, there's going to be a sense that, yeah, that deputy was doing that, but where were you, boss? Where were you, sergeant, commander, when all of this was going on? And you didn't stop it. So everybody else feels like it must be okay if the boss isn't getting involved, if they're not saying anything about it, if they're not intervening in any way, then it's coming on you. Now, it could have been that I made the comments that I did. I tried to stop the behavior. It continued. I tried to hold him accountable, and my lieutenant said, "Yeah, that's just Bill or Bob or Sal, whatever name." And I'm not going to support. Yeah, I'm not going to uphold that. I don't support you in this. Well, I did what I was required to do. So, you play it out again. If it starts to come down, it's going to stop with that commander who supported the behavior of that deputy over supporting the sergeant.
And that goes along with the culture shift too, because if the lieutenant sees the sergeant taking action, they might start thinking, I probably should have done something myself or, whatever. But again, now there's that mind shift where, okay, we're setting a new standard. We're holding people to a higher bar. We're raising our employees up to be the best that they can be, not just mediocre and tolerating all the things that aren't okay.
Right.
So it does very slowly start to shift the culture. And this is one of those examples. You like to talk about leadership from the bottom up and the top down.
Exactly.
This is one of those bottom up kind of opportunities, but it doesn't erase the top down type of intervention as well. It all works together and you meet in the middle and pretty soon the culture has shifted.
Right.
And
right.
It's a really good thing.
And I mean, those of us that are in law enforcement, we can think of organizations that have great cultures, a culture that you would want to be a part of. And we can also think of organizations that there's no way I would work for that organization because they have a reputation or the culture that we know, that we see displayed through their officers or through their command staff is it's not something that you want to be a part of because there's such a liability risk there. Not to mention the fact that it's such a negative environment to work in.
Rips your morale down.
It really does.
And then on the flip side of that, there are people who would never want to leave an organization that's solid and has that good reputation and they know what they're going to get and there's consistency and there's clear communication and there's very well communicated expectations. You've had people come to you and say, I got this really great job offer and it's twice the money or whatever. I'm not going.
Yeah.
I don't want to go. Yeah. And how good that feels to have that level of unity and talk about trust in teams and just the cohesive unity that you feel when things are firing well on all cylinders.
Yeah. Just like this deputy felt like I didn't have his back because I was holding him accountable there. And it's quite to the contrary.
Right.
I demonstrated clearly that I did have his back, that this could be a career ender for him. And I was ensuring that in spite of his own attitude towards that, if he listened to what I was telling him, he was going to be able to keep his job. If he didn't, then that could have had a really negative impact on him as a deputy. And I think that, I saw, kind of that everybody loves accountability until accountability is thrust upon you, or you're held accountable for something. I think people really do appreciate. I think that they really do see how important that is. Sometimes not necessarily on themselves, but they certainly see it when it affects, others on their team, and how important coming around and really realizing that when you create a culture where we're looking out for each other, and sometimes that means having tough conversations, but when we have the courage to look out for each other, you really then do know that they have your back. And those are always the teams that people want to be a part of.
If you have a supervisor or a sergeant or a commander that's listening today, what are some practical things that they can start doing right away to address problems earlier, to start stepping into an intervention role, even when it's not blatantly causing someone harm? We've talked a lot about intervening when you start losing your temper and you start losing your stuff on someone.
Yeah.
This is much more subtle. So what do you do? What's your challenge for the week on getting somebody to move into action?
I think the important piece in all of this is, there are moments where leaders see something that needs to be addressed, and it could be a pattern of behavior, or it could be a cultural issue. In some roles, could be a leadership blind spot, or really maybe just a situation that someone needs that guidance before a mistake becomes a bigger problem. And so you really have to just identify that and start looking at ways that you can approach it. And sometimes you may not know how to approach it. And I've had commanders come to me, I've had sergeants come to me and say, this is what I'm seeing, this is what's going on. I'm kind of at a loss. And then just having an opportunity to, talk through that with them. So I would say seek other people out, those that you kind of admire from a intervention standpoint. That person always intervenes in a and I'm going to use the word kind, but in a respectful, professional, kind way. There's those that intervene by standing in front of the room and yelling and pointing fingers, and nobody wants to be that person, nor do they want to have intervention come to them that way. That's a huge turn off, red flag. But find those people that you see have those tough conversations well, and go to them and say, this is something I'm struggling with one of my deputies, with one of my sergeants, whatever the case may be, and have them, kind of talk about how it is that they would intervene in the situation that you're facing. And once you start doing that, just like that first time, it's the toughest time, right? It can be scary. As we had talked at the beginning, it's, am I going to no longer be liked? Am I going to destroy a relationship? There's all of these things that go through your head. Nobody else has done it. Who do I think that I am? that I should step in? Have I walked down that road before? And I had to be intervened on. That's not a reason not to intervene on somebody else. In fact, it may be a good conversation starter, right? So it's important to take that first step to moving towards that. The more that happens, the more comfort you have in that. And the other part of that is hopefully you start to create a culture, at least in your team, and then hopefully in your platoon, in your division, in the organization, that's the culture that we collectively as an organization have each other's backs.
So good. And we talk a lot about leadership being strategy or leadership being influence, but sometimes leadership is finding the courage, mustering the courage to do the hard things and to step in early and have a conversation that helps somebody, that protects the culture, protects the entire organization and the community, and it prevents bigger problems down the road. I loved what you said earlier about when you step in earlier, it's less difficult to solve the problem, and you're also preventing more harm.
Right.
It's just the safe space. The earlier, the better. Really don't delay on that. And I think our listeners can take a step this week and just examine where is there an area that they might need to intervene as a leader,
Right.
and just take that next step of courage in their leadership. We've been talking today about the gap in leadership intervention, and it's that space between where leaders recognize or see a problem and when they choose to step in and address it. And closing that gap means mustering the courage and the strength, and sometimes grabbing some accountability from a mentor to come alongside and to assist and to help. But when we intervene as leaders, whether you're in law enforcement or anywhere else in the public or private sector, we don't just prevent problems. We're really helping people succeed. And again, it's about leading as a servant and trying to get the best out of the people that you lead.
Yeah.
You want them to be their very best selves.
Yeah, it's when I think about it, it's more than, just managing operations or responding to crisis. It's really about shaping the culture of the organization. And once you can start shaping that culture, we really have an opportunity to help people that we lead become the best versions of themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yep. If today's conversation was helpful to anyone who's listening, we hope that you will share it with another leader within your sphere of influence or your organization, somebody who's also developed a level of commitment to growing as a stronger, more capable, more servant-driven leader. And until next time, we just want to say thank you for joining us here at Elevate Your Call to Service podcast, and hope that you'll tune in with us next time.
If today's episode added value, don't let it end here.
Share it with someone on your command staff or leadership team, because strong leadership isn't built in isolation.
And if you're ready to develop or become proactive leaders inside your organization,
leaders who communicate clearly and strengthen internal trust,
then visit leleaders.com to learn more about our coaching programs, workshops, and keynotes.
And if the podcast has been helpful, we'd appreciate your 5-star review on Apple Podcasts.
Until next time, lead with clarity, lead with conviction, and elevate your call to service.